They say, where there's a will, there's a way. Well, we're going to be talking about wills, but in the sense of estate planning. My guest today is Robert VanDorn, attorney, and we're going to be talking about what you should be doing right now to prepare for the future. So, Robert, we're going to be talking about estate planning. What does that mean?
Well, it tends to mean making sure that you've got a plan that's enforceable, that divides the things that you've got left when you're gone, and that people have to follow. It isn't just something that you hope will be done. It's required to be done.
So this is the kind of thing that we tend to put off, don't we? I mean, none of us are ever going to die, so why even bother with this?
I think that some people tend to put it off. I think everybody's different. There are many, many reasons, and I don't think I know all the reasons why it's something that people don't do right away. I know for my wife and I, we put it off at the beginning because we couldn't agree on who to name to take care of the kids, for example, if we were both gone. We had not a disagreement, but a difference of opinion about that. And so there are many reasons. I mean, it's not the most fun topic, I guess, for people to think about. What if I'm going to be gone and what will happen then? But it is important. And so eventually I think most of us do sit down. It's like taxes. We sit down and we finally do something as it starts to feel like it needs to be done.
So now that the kids are grown up and they can take care of themselves,
yeah,
you're finally able to do it, right?
Well, and now it doesn't matter, right? Because they're on their own for the most part of doing as they please. But no, we did it. This is another thing you'll do. You'll realize that the two of you are going on a trip, for example, and that something could happen to the plane, and it will be very clear to you all of a sudden, I must go in and see that lawyer, for example. So it's true, people do put it off, but I think they always know in the back of their mind, I should get to that.
I should get to that. I should.
Mm-hmm.
And some don't.
Well, it's true. I think of Prince, the musical star, died a couple years ago, I think probably before he thought he would, and turns out not a single will or trust. And from everything I can tell about that, it did lead to extra complexity and expense and uncertainty. And you just don't get to say what you would like to say. I think you want to name, for example, particular people to do the job of gathering things together, paying the bills that need to be paid, and then distributing in the way that you said you wanted it done. And if you don't name those people, it's probably going to get done, but it won't get done necessarily by the ones you chose.
Now, you're starting to use some specialized language, so maybe we can unpack that for our audience. Wills and trusts, are those two words for the same thing? Are those different?
Yeah, they're very different, and I try not to use words that are complicated, but a will and a trust on a very oversimplified level do the same thing. They say what you want to happen when you're gone. And so on that basis, much of the same work is necessary. When you're gone, someone still needs to gather everything together, step one, and they need to pay all the bills that need to be paid legally, number two. And then number three, they have to distribute. So either way, trust or will, you're doing that. The difference, I guess, would be that with a trust, you're setting up kind of like an artificial jar, as it were. And hopefully this is a good illustration, but you create a jar and you put things in there. And you put your instructions in there about what to be done when you're gone. And then when you're gone, the person that you've named to be your helper, your trustee, your successor when you're gone, that person can take things out of the jar, do what needs to be done, and essentially take care of things without having to go to court, for example, to get authority to do it. And I always like to add right after that, though, that going to court for that purpose is not necessarily a bad thing. You're still doing the same process, you're still being careful, but you get to skip a few of those steps by by having a trust. And then there are other reasons. We could talk maybe a little bit about that, why for some people a trust can be a really good idea. But I think it's fair to say for most people, a will is pretty good. A will is a good way to go.
Now, another word that comes up in these discussions oftentimes is the word executor. So,
Okay.
considering that we're not talking about someone in the French Revolution that was operating the guillotine, what's an executor?
The executioner. I don't want to be executed. I think we have some jokes about that in business law. But the difference, I guess, is really no difference. I mean, an executor, as I understand it, is someone who was named in a will to do this gathering, paying, and distributing. A personal representative might be the same person in a situation where there's no will. And so it's not really something I think most people need to worry about. I think the real question is, who is it going to be? Who do I trust? Whom do I trust? And who will be honest? Who will be a good record keeper? Those are two of the main things that it's nice to have in that role. Whether you call them executors or the girl version is executrix. Or personal representative, it's all really the same thing. The trustee, the successor trustee in a trust, is doing a lot of that same work as an executor would.
So, as we're planning for the future and the inevitable, what are some of the things that we ought to consider in making an estate plan?
Well, I think it's a really good reminder to me that in addition to a will or a trust, some of the related documents are very important, and they're just great to have. And they're effective, and they work before you're gone and before you die, and it's important stuff. And so, for example, it's great to have a power of attorney, both for financial matters and for medical decisions. If you can't make medical decisions, you're still here, you're living, but you're sick. And it's nice to have named a couple of people to be your agent in that situation. Advance directives are other things that are good to have as part of an estate plan. You're telling the doctors at that point with a very clear piece of paper that if you're terminally ill someday or you're permanently unconscious and the doctors don't think you're going to wake up, that you don't want a machine to keep you going. You've decided there wouldn't be any quality of life at that point, and you don't want to be kept going indefinitely, either by machine or by artificial food and water processes. So powers of attorney, advance directives, those are all part of an overall plan that, as you say, inevitably we get older, we get less certain and less sure of ourselves, and we need somebody to be there to help out. I think it's one of the best things about having finished that process. You can take a deep breath and know I've taken care of this, and it's covered, and I can enjoy the rest of life without worrying about some of that.
Now, when we use the term advance directives, is that roughly the same thing as what people call a living will?
Yeah, it's unfortunate in my mind that there are different terms for the same thing. An advance directive, a living will, a right to die directive, I've heard it put that way. It's all kind of the same. Living will might be the most unfortunate term because it's got will as part of the phrase, and it's not the same
not a
as
will.
a will. That's right. But it's my will that I not be kept going artificially, and so I understand the thought. But maybe advance directive is the best way to think of that. You're telling the doctors in advance what you do or don't want when you're really sick someday, if that happens.
Now, some people have a lot of wealth at their disposal, others less. Is it important for the person that doesn't have as much to have a will?
It is. And this is where I have found it helpful to see some of the other advice that I've read about this. there's some really good advice by an Adventist fellow named Ed Reed, who's a lawyer. And one of the things I remember him explaining was, look, you could get hit by a bus or a UPS truck. I don't want to pick on any particular company, but you might have no will. But if somebody ends your life early, your estate will have a claim against that entity or that person. And so even if you didn't have much at the beginning, you might end up with a lot, and you'd wish, as Reed puts it, that you had said what you wanted done, because otherwise the state will assume, as he puts it, that you're an atheist, and none of that money would ever go to charity. It does go to family in more or less the right general way. But no, I would say no matter whether you have a little in your mind or a lot, it's a good idea to be able to say what you want done. I think that's part of maybe our Christian duty, to take care of our assets in the way that God would want us to do. And rather than to leave it to chance, I think it's your chance to say, this is what I want to do with the things that are left.
So who should you discuss this with? I mean, should you discuss it with your children, your spouse? Who would you recommend that you talk with when you're making these plans?
Well, I think it's always a good idea to talk to your spouse. I don't know of any situation when that might be a bad thing. So yes, number one, talk to your spouse, because typically you'll make the same documents. You'll say, I leave everything to you, and you leave everything to me. And beyond that, it'll say much the same thing oftentimes for the kids and for any charities that you want to remember. So definitely talk to your spouse. I pause a little bit, I guess, on talking to kids, depending on what you plan to do. But generally, I think it is a good idea for them to know early and up front what your thoughts are. And especially if somebody might be unhappy at the end to learn something that they had no idea you were thinking about, it'd be nice to be able to have told them a long time ago in a consistent way that this is what I plan to do. And that way there's no disappointment and there's no surprise at the end, and you're not reading or hearing that document, for example, for the very first time. So I would definitely talk to kids. I would definitely talk to parents. I say spouse.
Mm-hmm.
I just pause a little bit maybe on the children. Depends on the age,
mm-hmm.
depends on the circumstances, but generally I think it is a good idea to tell the kids too.
For those in our audience, I want you to get your pen and pencil ready. You may want to take down the information that we'll be putting on the screen in just a few moments about how you can contact Attorney Robert VanDorn if you're looking for more information about establishing an estate plan and preparing for the future. We're going to come back in the second segment and say much more about wills, trust, and planning for the future. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Valley Viewpoint. If you're just joining us, we're talking about planning for your future and your estate. And I've been visiting with Attorney Robert VanDorn, the Upper Columbia Conference Trust Officer. So, we've talked about a lot of things already, but I want to find out more. We're talking about who we should be speaking with when we're making this kind of plan. I know some people also speak with professionals, attorneys like yourself, and then there are others that say, hey, I can just go on the internet and download something and fill it out, and that's all there is to it. So what advice, I mean, I guess I can guess, but what advice would you give, and are there some downsides to trying to do it yourself?
You know, it's a great question. Number one, I haven't really made an exhaustive study of what happens on the internet when you try to do this. I know that clients will come in and they'll say, I tried that and I got overwhelmed and it was too hard, it was too confusing to me, and I had too many questions that I couldn't talk to somebody about. I mean, I wouldn't say that you can't do it that way. I think it's probably possible. I just don't really know what's out there. I know that there are services that cost money and that a lot of lawyers have worked hard to try to refine. And so for all I know, they work, but I don't know much about them. I just know that people have reported, wow, that just made my head spin, and I'm here to help explain what I want and then let you do it. It's like anything else. I think I could work on the car a little bit at home, but at some point I'm just not comfortable doing that, and I don't do it well because I don't do it all the time. Maybe the other thing that comes to mind is that some of those things tend to be sort of a one-size-fits-all. I've had people say, well, can't you just get me a blank form for a power of attorney? I mean, you do them all the time, right? Just get me a blank form and I'll fill in my name and the names of the agents that I want to choose. But there are always questions. I think this, Dan, is one of the things that there really is value in seeing an attorney. Over the years and after law school and after all the trouble that we see, we are trained and we're used to asking questions and asking what if. What if this happens? What if that, did you think about that? What if this over there happens? And sometimes those are uncomfortable questions for people, but I think they're important when it comes to law. And so it's something that is part of the benefit of going to see somebody. I wouldn't want to buy a coat that fits everybody. I want to go to the store and look for my size and then look, shop on the rack there. And so likewise, I'd want something that was customized for me and for my particular situation. Other than that, I don't know how the internet would work.
Is it a little bit like doing it yourself, doctoring? I mean,
yeah.
You think you have a cold, but turns out it's the flu and you're running 104 temperature before you know it, and you wish that you'd gone to see a doctor.
It could be. I mean, I can't speak for the doctors out there either. I think they probably do know what's best for them in many situations, but you don't have that perspective. You don't have the distance. If I were a doctor and I didn't feel well, I might try all the things I know, but I might want some perspective from an outside source. Hey, somebody I know, what do you think? And I think that's part of the benefit too. We're not as closely tied up with the family and the money and the particular assets that mean something to me, the piano or the, that stock that I bought 25 years ago that turned out to be so great. You want somebody, I think, who's got a little bit of remoteness from your situation to give you some detached and disinterested and professional advice. I think that really is probably the benefit of going to see somebody. And as you brought up, I mean, the idea that doctors who treat themselves and lawyers who treat themselves, they have fools for clients and fools for patients. I mean, you really probably want to avoid the wisdom that underlies that adage. There's a reason why we say that.
Now, my wife and I did this many years ago, back when they were little children. Now they have children of their own. So
Okay.
it's been a number of years, and we did it, I guess you would say, the old-fashioned way. We went to a professional like yourself, and we sat down and discussed our needs at that particular point and so forth. The internet was just on the horizon way back in those years. And I'm thinking about some of the information that we set out in our plans. And I'm glad that people cannot hack anything that's some of the more personal things that are in there. And I think I would be concerned today about something that might be available for other eyes to see. So
in terms of the internet, for example, if you're working with some system that's cloud-based and their information is on some web server somewhere, and you're saying, what if that got out?
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's that. I mean, I by the same token, I suppose somebody could break into the law office and rifle through the files and find your personal information. We do try very hard to lock things up and keep things secret and not talk to other people about your your information. That there probably is something to that, but human nature being what it is, I suppose there's always a possibility that something might come out. It might be, back to your original question, one of the reasons that people tend to put it off. I don't necessarily like talking to somebody I don't know about money or about family and the intersection of money and family and maybe charity. That takes a little while to get comfortable with somebody and to trust them and to be willing to talk about that. But that might be one of the reasons why we put that off. And yet it reminded me of another point too. I'm not sure if you wanted to ask about this, but a lot of times people will think, well, I made a will 20 years ago. It must be expired by now, right? The milk container date is past. But for a lot of reasons, it doesn't tend to work that way. We build these things to last, and even if names change, for example, and people move away to new towns, I would never recommend revising a will just for that reason. Grandkids might be a different thing. Your priorities might be different. And your responsibilities to your family or your community or your church, whoever it might be, your responsibilities may have changed as you perceive them over the years. And then for that reason, you might want to make some substantive changes. But wills, you write one and get it witnessed properly and effectively signed and notarized. They're good for a long, long time.
I'm glad you mentioned that, though. That's something that we hadn't considered. We have talked about maybe updating, but we now have grandchildren, and we certainly didn't have that when we first made the will. So that would be an extra incentive for us to make some changes and just kind of bring it up to date to our current life situation, which is very much different than when our children were even younger than our grandkids are now. So
Sure.
I'm glad you made that suggestion.
Well, it's a good idea to read the thing every 2 or 3 years. You went through all the work and you went and met somebody and got past all those barriers and did the document. Even if it's not the most wonderful project, get it out every couple, 3 years. Take a look, make sure it reads the way you want it to. You might have a new question. Something might dawn on you that, wow, it's different now. I need to change that. And it doesn't hurt to look.
I know that I'm thankful just as a child that my parents have done estate planning, and we know exactly what is going to happen when they eventually pass away. My sister will be the executor because she lives right in the same city where my parents live. And they've, told us how they want their assets to be used when they're not here anymore. And I know it's comforting to me, and I know that I've seen other families that almost go to war when the parents pass away, fighting over this and fighting over that. And I guess there's no absolute way of avoiding it, but at least when the parents have done advanced planning, there's an expression of how they wanted things to be.
Well, you mentioned war, and that is something familiar to attorneys over the years. You see a lot of those, and I think on some level there's probably no way to prohibit that from ever happening in every single case, no matter how thorough the planning. People are going to fight sometimes because that's what they want to do. And yet, part of my job title, I'm kind of intrigued by this myself, is trust officer. And as an officer, I'm thinking, well, to some extent that implies that I'm going to stand up for you when you've written your plan and the years have gone by, and maybe somehow there's some attack on it or there's some pressure or influence there. I would like to think that as a trust officer that I'd be able to try to protect you from that as the years go by. But as I say, I think people fight sometimes. I saw a year or so ago a case that was mentioned up in the Spokane papers, a fight in Idaho about this beautiful property along Lake Pend Oreille, and family just couldn't agree, and Mom wasn't even gone yet. And it was the saddest thing. The Idaho Supreme Court, the family split up, 3 or 4 kids on one side of the courtroom and 1 or 2 on the other side. Nobody else in the courtroom. The Idaho Supreme Court is there, and they're fighting about that.
That's terrible. Listen, thanks for joining us.
You're
I know there's
welcome.
probably unanswered questions, but we've given your information to our audience so that they can follow up if they so choose. Thank you for joining us for Valley Viewpoint today, and we hope that you will join us again. If you have an idea, a concept for a future viewpoint, if you'd like to be a guest, why not contact us? Our station number is 509-529-9149, or you can contact me at valleyviewpoint.bmt.tv. Thanks for joining us. For Viewpoint, I'm Dan Solis.